And now I am delighted to introduce our speaker for this hour, Donna Howard. Donna lives in Madisonville, Kentucky, and is an English instructor at Madisonville Community College. Donna was 22 years old when she stepped into her first classroom, and she fell in love with teaching. Her favorite poet, Robert Frost, once stated that his object in life was to unite his avocation with his vocation. Donna says that she has also been that fortunate and has enjoyed a career of 43 successful and rewarding years in the classroom. Please welcome Donna Howard.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to my session today. For the next few minutes, I am going to share with you the hows and the whys behind my redesign of my developmental English classes. And if you're wondering why the pause, I just completely lost my PowerPoint, but I think I have found it again. As you were told, one of my favorite poets, Robert Frost, stated that his object in life was to unite his avocation with his vocation. And I, too, was fortunate enough to accomplish that feat. I have to say that he was quite successful in combining those two as a career. I, too, have been that fortunate. I was 22 years old, as she told you, when I walked into my first classroom, and I fell in love. Teaching was made for me, and I was made for teaching. I would like to introduce you to my students in my traditional developmental English class. I certainly hope that does not look like yours. My delight, my pleasure in teaching began to diminish about 6 years ago, and my frustration began to intensify. Just over the span of a few years, the structure of my developmental classes began to differ drastically. No longer did my college classrooms consist mainly of the young, well-prepared high school graduates. On the contrary, my classrooms were becoming filled with underprepared high school graduates and with non-traditional students who had been out of school for several years. I began to recognize that the traditional classroom approach was no longer adequately meeting the needs of my college students. Changing times, changing circumstances, and changing occurrences had certainly altered the effectiveness of my traditional classroom method of instruction. I was trying every teaching tool that I knew, and I was still not achieving the success with my students that I desired. There was so much apathy in the class. I just could not seem to motivate these students, and I definitely wanted my students to be engaged in the classroom. What I came to realize is that in a traditional classroom setting, which is teacher-oriented and lecture-based, creates a learning environment where students are not held accountable for their learning, and it actually permits passive listening. In a traditional classroom, students are expected to do the same, perform the same, expect the same, day in and day out. And as the students sit politely and passively, the instructor's enthusiasm just diminishes due to the lack of any student engagement. Does this look familiar to you? I was taking mounds of grammar and mechanics worksheets to class for in-class instruction, practice, homework, quizzes. Some of the students completed the assignments while some did not. Checking the homework in class was just futile. The students were not interested in any explanation and just settled for, oh well, I missed that one. After listening to some of my colleagues, I began to realize that I was not the only frustrated instructor. I walked by Marcella's office one afternoon around 5 o'clock, and she looked at me and said, "I am going to get all of these papers graded before I go home today, even if it kills me." I met Sarah coming in one Monday morning, and she had stacks of papers. She looked at me and said, "I am dragging today. I've been up all night grading these papers." Mary and I were getting on the elevator one Friday afternoon. She had a stack of papers in her arms and looked at me and said, "I guess that I will spend all weekend grading these papers." And there's me. I was getting to the point that I was so frustrated that I was contemplating retirement. I felt like I was doing all the work and my students were just passively going through the motions. Until, and let me tell you, that is an enormous until. I attended the 2008 KADE conference, and I attended the Pearson session on Pearson My Writing Lab. I immediately knew that I had found the solution to my frustration. You see, I had already restructured our reading program into the hybrid and Emporium classes through Pearson's My Reading Lab. So my thinking was that if my reading lab worked so well for the reading redesign, why would my writing lab not work as well for redesigning the writing program? I was rejuvenated. So based upon this logic that my students were bored, they were lacking in effort, not engaged, submitting below standard papers, I was not seeing an improvement in mechanic and grammar applications, I was getting no satisfaction, so I began to redesign my classroom methods and course structure. From the beginning of my teaching career, the terms hybrid, Emporium, and acceleration were certainly not common to my method of teaching. However, as I began to attend conferences and became introduced to these concepts, I became intrigued by how well these techniques combined with my writing lab. Consequently, I completely redesigned my classroom approach, and I must say with remarkable success. My first step was to contact the Pearson representatives and gain access to my writing lab so that I could become familiar with it before I began my restructuring process. And I have to thank Kathy and Chris and Daniel. They were so helpful and they were so patient with me, and my design was in the making. As I redesigned my classroom, I first decided to set up the hybrid classroom, and setting up the hybrid classroom was so easy. This innovative technique combined with my writing lab perfectly. And then implementing the Writing Emporium classroom was also so easy. It just paralleled so nicely with the classroom instruction, textbook material, and my writing lab. So one might ask, just what is a hybrid classroom? Hybrid classrooms are learning pathways that address the needs of visual learners, auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners. Obviously, students have different learning styles. The hybrid and the Emporium address these varying learning styles. As I set up my course, I included the following mandates and expectations. Students were expected to complete all daily assignments, all writing assignments. They had to compile a writing portfolio. They had to complete all the assigned sets in my writing lab. They had to complete those activities according to a designated time frame. They had to complete all the composition assignments and my writing lab in order to pass the class, and students must adhere to the attendance policy. Otherwise, they're going to treat it as an online class, and that's not my objective. By the first or second week, we usually have trouble with students getting their financial aid, so some of the students don't get their books the first day. But by the first or second week, all students should have purchased their textbooks and have access codes to my writing lab. You can then register your students. I would suggest that you require your students to write their username, their password, and their access code on an index card for you to keep. They tend to lose these easily, and if they do, you're usually online with tech support for at least 30 minutes. I set up my course requiring my students to first complete the comprehensive diagnostic test. Now, my writing lab incorporates grammar and mechanics for skill reinforcement. My writing lab supplies recall and apply exercises which reinforce grammar lessons. They provide immediate feedback and motivate students to keep working to achieve the mastery. What I like about the recall and apply exercises is that they have a progressive structure, and that moves students from literal comprehension to critical application. I require my students to complete all of the recall sets. I also require my students to complete all of the exercise sets unless the student has a 90% or above after having taken half of the exercises in the apply. Usually the recall sets, there are anywhere from 8 to 10, but the apply exercises, sometimes there's 16, 17. So if I have a student complete 9 or 10, and that student has an average of 90 or above, then I encourage that student to move on to the next assignment. The one aspect of my writing lab that stands out in my mind is relevancy. Until students see the relevancy of learning the material bears no relevancy for them. My writing lab encourages relevancy for the students. For example, in one of my classes, I noticed Bonnie, a student, sitting in front of the computer, and she was crying. I said, "What is wrong with you, Bonnie?" And she said, "I don't even know what a fragment is, so how am I supposed to do these exercises?" Well, we had done quite a bit of work in class, and I had given them some tools that I wanted them to use as guides when they went through the punctuation and mechanics sets on my writing lab. So I asked her, I said, "Bonnie, did you use the handout I gave you on sentence structure?" She said, "No." Then I said, "Bonnie, did you use the index packet we made in class for identifying fragments?" Her answer, "No." So I sat down beside of her, and I went over the chapter in the textbook on fragments, which we had already discussed in class. I discussed the sentence formula handout with her, which we had already covered in class. I then went over the index card packet for recognizing fragments and showed her how to apply this to her selection of the correct answer, which we had already covered in class. And then I worked the next two sets with her using these teaching tools. Results? She made an 80 on the first one and an 85% on the second one. Thus, no relevancy, no learning. Integrating my writing lab into your course is very simple. You just just need to decide if you want to do the hybrid or if you want to do the Emporium or if you want to use it as homework. You address the assessment requirements by the pretest the first week. And once these students have taken these diagnostic tests, then each student has his or her own individual study plan. I encourage my students to work heavily in the grammar and the mechanic components of the lab at the beginning of the course so that these applications may take place early in the writing. Several qualities that I like about my writing lab. One of those is that it provides so much practice, it provides application, it provides high-quality composition instruction, and there are more than 80 topics ranging from grammar, mechanics, to paragraph essay development. I would say that the purpose of my writing lab is that it is an enhancement teaching tool to encourage and establish mastery learning. Now, you know that meeting the needs of all students, even in a small class, can be difficult. My writing lab supports revision work, incorporates mastery learning, and decreases the instructor's frustration. The diagnostic tests comprehensively assess student skills. Students then receive a personalized study plan, and then they focus on the areas in which they need to improve. Writing exercises. Now, I will tell you this. In the My Writing Lab section, you first have the tutorial section, which I insist that my students do. There is a set of objectives, and then there is an auditory presentation, which is absolutely a wonderful tutorial device. And I encourage them not to do the write process. I know that sounds terrible, but I have found that once the students apply this write section of my writing lab, write their own paragraph, there's no feedback. So I create my own My Writing Lab prompts. I engage students in the writing process by encouraging them to revise their work through right-click, and I'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. And you don't have stacks of graded paper on your desk anymore. Everything is maintained in an online grade book automatically that they do in the lab. You have access to detailed reports. You can track the progress of the class. You can track the progress of the individual. You can tell how much time that individual has put in on the writing lab on a particular date. So you have a running grade average for each student. It's posted for you to see at all times. Now, the students can monitor their own progress through their scores, but they cannot see their grade average on the grade book. Right-click it's just exciting news. My Writing Lab right-click reduces editing and grading time, and it encourages students to become critical thinkers and thoughtful writers. I think it's a wonderful new enhancement to my writing lab. When I first started using my writing lab, they had not added right-click. Now, this is the assumption that some people make. Right-click corrects. No, it does not. I had a colleague say to me the other day, I don't want to use right-click. Sometime my students are going to have to learn to edit their own paper. Well, if she would use right-click, she would see right-click does not correct, it teaches. Once the student types the rough draft, and then the students will launch right-click. It will tag their errors, usually red or green, and it will give them choices of how they might correct that error, and then it also directs them to a tutorial to explain why they missed and to explain why the correct answer was the one that applies to the rules. Writer's Tool is an excellent reinforcement tutoring, and it also summarizes the overall strength of their writing. It will tell them if their word choice is weak, or it will tell them if their sentence structure is weak or strong. It's just a wonderful enhancement. It absolutely allows them to edit their own rough draft. And then once they've edited the rough draft, then they turn the paper in to the instructor for a revision, editing suggestion. And for the most part, the only editing, revisions, suggestions you will probably offer after right-click will have to do with the content, the structure, and possibly a very, very few errors. Students revise their rough draft, then they submit the final copy. This way, students are spending more time on task. They're learning to become independent writers, and you as an instructor spend less time on editing. You don't have to mark all those spelling errors, all those agreement errors, all those verb usage errors. And basically, you're not writing run-on, comma, splice, fragment all the way down the page. It's just a wonderful tool. Now, my hybrid class, the way I chose to set this up is that my hybrid class meets on Tuesday for classroom instruction, and then my hybrid class meets on Thursday in the computer lab for online instruction through my writing lab. Now, I had heard earlier today that some of the schools choose to use my writing lab as a homework assignment, and I think that's fine. But I chose to use day 2 of the week in the computer lab so that I could work with my students. I like to have interaction. I like to work with them through the teaching tools that I've given them as they work through my writing lab and share their experiences. With the hybrid and my writing lab, classroom instruction is focused on writing strategies, while my writing lab focuses on the grammar and mechanic components of the class. Students are held accountable in the grammar and mechanics of the lab, and they are given immediate feedback which explains the correct answer if they should select the wrong choice. I did not want my students just to randomly select and hopscotch through the sets that they wanted to do in the lab. So I gave them a mandated assignment sheet the first week of class detailing exactly the progression that I wanted them to follow in this lab. I coordinated this assignment outline with the classroom instruction and the homework assignment. Now, this is a sample of their first writing lab assignment sheet. They have 8 assignments, but I just put the first 5 on here to show you something. If you will notice, assignment 1, I'm dealing with run-ons, fragments, combining sentences, and commas. Assignment 2, I'm dealing with apostrophes, semicolons, quotation marks, sentence structure, parallelism. Those are the ones that I focus on at the beginning of class because those are the most common types of errors that these students make. Obviously, time, an hour and 15 minutes a week, does not permit completion of all 8 assignments. So I tell my students at the beginning of the semester, for every hour that you are in class, I expect you to spend 1 hour a day in the lab on your own time. I guess you could call it homework. Now, the textbooks that I selected for the hybrid and the Emporium classes, Writing for Life, Sentences and Paragraph was the book I selected for my 090 class. And I selected along these lines, writing paragraphs and essays for my 091. And what I particularly liked about these texts is that they were in a skill-building workbook format. And that worked very well with my intention to use the textbook as supplemental instruction in grammar and mechanics. So you see, hybrid design incorporates the characteristics of both the traditional classroom and online learning. You're usually looking at a 50% classroom environment and a 50% online format. And you know what? This combination addresses the varying learning styles of students. They're getting all exposure to all three types. I like the hybrid class because these are the opportunities that I have the first class day of the week on Tuesday. I didn't have to worry about teaching grammar. I had the entire class time to devote to writing skills. I could provide adequate instruction so that I could become confident that my students had a good understanding of what I was asking them to do. We had time in class to discuss and highlight handouts on the concepts, the format of a particular type of paper we were writing. We had time in class to read, discuss, and analyze models. I like to use models for my students to see when I make their writing assignment. We had time for group activities, group discussions. I like for my students to throw out a topic that they have in mind and then look to their neighbor and say, well, what would you do if you had this topic? Do you have any ideas? And you would be surprised that the sharing of ideas generates ideas for their papers, because I hear students say all the time, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Also, it allows time for in-class clustering. And then from the clustering, we can work on developing topic sentences. And it's time for a class read-around of students' rough drafts for suggestions. Now, I discovered something, and I think you probably have too. I discovered that my developmental writing students absolutely love fragments, comma splices, and run-on. Therefore, sentence structure and punctuation were addressed in the classroom in the first 4 weeks. That's the only time I address any mechanics or grammar in the classroom other than in the lab on Thursday. And I developed a unit entitled Say Goodbye to Fragments, Comma Splices, and Run-Ons in 4 easy lessons. And I implemented this unit during the first 4 weeks of the semester. Now, this unit corresponded with the exercises in my writing lab, and once we completed these assignments in the unit, the lessons, then the students were to use those lessons as guides when they're working on sentence structure and punctuation. Once I completed these 4 units and my students had completed just the first assignment in the MYWRITINGLAB punctuation component. They were submitting rather impressive papers just after 1 month in the class. I was seeing very few fragments, comma splices, or run-ons. Now, I apologize for this slide. I couldn't get all of this on here without overlapping, but I wanted to give you just a typical scenario of a hybrid classroom, day 1, day 2. Of course, on day 1, you go through the syllabus, and I always give my students a teaching module stapled to my syllabus, and I remind the students that all chapter assignments, including homework, are included in the module, and the students will be expected to complete those as scheduled. In other words, on Tuesday, I'm not going to say you need to read chapter 1 by next Tuesday. You need to complete page 154 through 158 by next Tuesday. I'm not going to do that. That is in the module, and they are to follow it. And you know, my thinking is these are 9-0 students normally, and if I don't teach them responsibility, then their chances of doing well are slim. Also, the first day, I show them a PowerPoint on the writing process, paragraph development, and topic sentences. I show them a PowerPoint on narrative writing, since that's our first writing assignment. They do an analysis of 3 narrative writings. Then, as our pre-writing activity, I give them a copy of the poem Birches by Robert Frost, which we read and then discuss what he says and how that relates to childhood memories that come to mind. And I ask them to turn the poem over, because on the back is this enormous birch tree filled with branches. And I ask them to write down all the childhood memories on that tree. Then they have to select one memory for the paper topic, cluster a graphic organizer for a rough draft of a narrative paragraph. I then shift over to punctuation. I have a sentence formula handout, which is one of the first lessons in my 4 easy lessons unit, for them to use in application in the My Writing. Then on Thursday, which is day 2, we do reinforcement and applications of the concepts presented in the classroom. In the writing lab, I ask them to do the audio tutorial only on paragraph development, topic sentence, and narrative writing. And then they began on lesson 1 with the fragments, the comma splices, and the run-ons. This is a sample of the sentence structure that I give them and the formulas that I show them, and I encourage my students to keep this handout close by. This is what I was asking Bonnie. Did you use your sentence formula handout? And if they can use this to determine the correct answer to sentence structure and punctuation. If they're doing a unit on run-ons or comma splices, then I say, you see any formulas in your 4 choices? And if there is a formula, that's the correct answer. They become familiar with these formulas rather quickly. This is another one that I do. Not only do I give them the compound, I give them the complex. I give them the D, I. Subordinating conjunctions are on the back. I teach my students to identify fragments through recognizing subordinating conjunctions as they introduce dependent clauses which cannot stand alone. Thus, that one type of fragment becomes easily recognizable to them. And then Formula 4, ID, independent, dependent, takes care of those commas. You know, they always want to put a comma in front of a cause. They want to put a comma in front of the subordinating conjunction dependent clause. This works quite well. Now, the writing emporium, another aspect that I like about my writing lab is that it also creates, if you don't want to do the hybrid, it also creates a situation for establishing the writing emporium. Now, these classes meet 2 days a week in the computer lab for online instruction. It encourages critical thinking. It encourages independent learners, self-paced learning, one-on-one interaction. It's just wonderful when you can sit down with these students when they get so frustrated and say, let me help you with this. And I give 15-minute mini lessons at the beginning of each class regarding the composition assignment for that week. And by the time they've been through all this, they have the auditory, they have the visual, and they have the kinesthetic learning experience. Another aspect of the emporium that I like is that it encourages critical thinking skills. And this setting requires concentration, logic, reasoning, and cognitive skills more so than I can require of my students in the classroom. They're actually completely engaged in a self-paced, independent, skill mastery learning atmosphere. I always thought it was funny when I had a night class which was a hybrid, and on the class night they were asking me for a smoke break every 15 minutes. But when I did the emporium class at night, they forgot they needed to go smoke. They were so absorbed in that computer. And I would usually ask them about an hour and a half or 2 hours into the class, you guys want to take a break? Don't you need to smoke a cigarette? And they'd say, oh, yeah. But see, to me, they were actually absorbed in learning. Another aspect that my writing lab affords is acceleration. Now, I went to a conference in Baltimore last March, maybe, on acceleration, and I was really impressed with what I heard. And when we came back, I asked the Dean of Academic Affairs if she would allow me to pilot that through my 090 class. And in an acceleration class, students have the opportunity to advance more quickly through the developmental courses. They were both motivated and excited about this possibility. Acceleration through my writing lab. Once the student attains the mastery of 80% in the 090 My Writing Lab, which is the lowest developmental level, and meets the written composition requirements for 090 with a B average or above, this student may then progress into the English 091 Writing Lab. And that means that this student has completed the activities and that student has taken the post-diagnostic test for a 9.0 and has had an 80 average or above. The next sequence is that the students must then meet the mastery requirements of the 091 My Writing Lab with a 90% average, and they must maintain a B average on all written compositions. Now, what I do for the compositions is that basically the 090 and the 091 students write similar assignments. However, Once the student accelerates into English 091, then he begins the revision process of the papers that he has done in 090 to enhance their quality, and the rubric by which the 091 papers are graded is quite more challenging than the 090. Therefore, they're called to write a higher level paper. They have to have a 90 average and a B on all written compositions, pass their post-test, and once that student has met those requirements, that student is eligible to enroll in English 101 the following semester. Last year, I had 8 students who accelerated last semester, and they are now in English 101. And currently, to date, 5 of my 090 students have already accelerated out of 090, and they will be working in English 091, my writing lab, when we return from our spring break. %80 of the students selected for the program accelerated from 090 to 091 to enroll in English 101 the following semester. And you know what? I think that's pretty good for a first-time pilot, but I think it is also exceptional for 090 students to achieve that. The many advantages that my writing lab offers is that faculty can teach using a variety of online and in-class teaching strategies. The hybrid model allows instructors to incorporate new types of interactive and independent learning activities that may not have been possible in the traditional course. Research indicates that students learn more in the hybrid format, and they develop higher order critical thinking skills. Research also contends that faculty state that students are better able to master concepts and apply what they have learned. More results are that the hybrid classrooms offer more advantages. The traditional setting restricts the type of learning and environment that a student experiences. And research says hybrid classrooms are the future and eventually will prove to be more effective than traditional. However, research also indicates that the choice of the hybrid classroom falls to the choice of the individual. I'm giving you a chart. This side of the chart is my traditional class average from 4 years ago, I guess. And their overall class average was 82%. However, my hybrid overall class average was 93%. And this is what I think is remarkable, is that the traditional retention rate, the average for the traditional classroom, was 70%. My hybrid classroom retention rate is 94%. And in my writing lab pre-test average at the beginning of the semester, the class average was a 57. And in my writing lab post-test at the end of the semester, the class average was 81. I consider this to be a successful endeavor. Student attitudes and performance levels were enhanced. But I will say this, none of this would have been possible without Pearson's My Writing Lab. So if you're looking for a new twist in your classroom approach, I would definitely recommend that you consider the hybrid, the Emporium, and the acceleration program through my writing lab. I did not make this a lengthy presentation because I thought that you might have questions at the end if you are not familiar with this, and I wanted to be able to allow time for your questioning. Thank you for listening, and goodbye, and you have a nice afternoon.
Thank you so much, Donna. That was a very clear and easy to understand presentation, and we do have a few questions for you. So I'm just curious, what about the other instructors in your department? Are they also using My Writing Lab? We have a question from Susan Grover that asks, have you been able to help them to participate with you in using My Writing Lab? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. I restructured my reading, the whole restructuring of my reading, our reading program here first, before I started with the English. So all of the colleagues have been aware of the fact that we are on the mark for classroom redesign. And my Dean of Affairs has been so generous to allow me to pilot these programs. So I piloted the restructuring of the reading using my reading lab, and those classes are now in a reading emporium. So it's not like they were in the dark. They had heard enough that they knew a little about the lab. So then I piloted my writing lab, and we had monthly meetings as I gave them my progress, my information. We had Pearson representatives come down and speak to them. I shared PowerPoints with them. I shared lesson plans with them. I shared my teaching module with them. I worked with them individually, explaining to them how you work through my writing lab. And today, as of date, we only have 4 090 instructors, and 3 of the 4 are piloting the 090 and the 091 lab this semester.
Okay. Question from Catherine Lane at Northwestern Oklahoma State University. Do you use tutor services as well as right-click?
Well,
the Pearson tutor services.
Yes. Yes, there's excellent tutorials. That's why I like the right-click. You know, my colleague said at some time they have to learn how to edit their own papers. Well, I explained to her that along with the right-click tagging those errors, it also provides, all you have to do is go to the top and click the word tutorial, and it gives them a whole set of rules on every type of error that they have missed. Therefore, you know, when I would hand back a graded exercise in class on grammar and mechanics, all my students would do is just look at the grade and toss the paper. And there was no learning. But in this one, once you miss a question, then there is an explanation as to what the correct answer is and why, and it even gives you rules. So yes, I definitely encourage them to use the tutoring in my writing lab. It's excellent.
Okay, thanks. A question from Ernie Branson at Edison State College in Florida. How much do you augment the My Writing Lab with original online content? Do you make use of instructional assistants / TAs in your writing emporiums? If so, how much do you think that this helps with student retention and success?
No, I do not use instructional assistants. I want interaction with my students, and my classes are small.
Mm-hmm. And how much, oh, go ahead.
Well, that allows me time to just keep rotating around the room. I don't ever sit down. I just visit with them from time to time, see what they're doing, and ask them questions. And if I see that they're getting ready to miss one, I say, let's think about that. Let's talk through this. And once we've made this unit, 4 easy lessons to avoiding the fragments and the comma splices and the run-ons, then if I see that they're having difficulty, I say, let's get that packet out and let me talk to you about this one.
And the beginning part of that question, how much do you augment the My Writing Lab with original online content?
I'm not understanding what you're asking me.
I guess Ernest's question is, you know, in addition to My Writing Lab, are you supplying any sort of content that you've generated yourself?
Yes, other than, you know, I told you I had that unit that I have developed this semester, and they have those activities to use as a format. But for the most part, other than that, then no, I do not. I do not hand them out rules. I do not give them exercises. They are primarily hooked into my writing lab, and it is also a one-time go-through. I had one student ask me early in the semester, he was doing fragments, and I think he had completed half of them, and he said, could you reset this so that I could start all over, because I'm not making above 50. And I said, no, this is a one-time, one-show, go. I've given you tutorial sheets to use. You have your textbook. You have your tutorial online. And I did not reset it for him, but once he got out his applications that we had made, he did fine with the rest of them.
Okay. I have a question from Elizabeth Fullen at Montana State University Billings. It's kind of a big question. Can you give a recap of who in the faculty and administration were involved in the redesign process, and what was the total time frame of the redesign from concept to implementation?
2 years for the reading and year for the writing, and I did it alone.
Oh, wow. Okay, good answer. Okay, here's a question from Wake Tech Community College. What is the difference in the My Writing Lab grammar activities in 090 and 091? And also, how long are the hybrid and Emporium classes?
The hybrid and Emporium classes meet 2 days a week for an hour and 15 minutes, and it's just the complexity of the level of difficulty in the 090 and the 091. It's basically the same concepts, and if you were just looking at the list, if you brought up My Writing Lab 090 and looked at the list of activities and brought up Writing Lab 091, you would not see any difference. However, once you click in and you get into the activities and the sets, then you see that the level of difficulty has increased.
Okay, great. Alrighty, well, I want to thank you, Donna, for your time today, and I just want to let everyone know that Donna is a My Writing Lab faculty advisor, and she'd hopefully be willing to, you know, contact a few of you if you have additional, more detailed questions. And once again, this presentation will be available on the Speaking About website. We'll be sure to send you a link to that as soon as they're posted online. So thank you so much, Donna, for a very thorough presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good day, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.